Well, in our first story this week about airline pilots gone wild, after an August 4, 2025 flight, a veteran EasyJet captain checked into the Malia Dunas Beach Resort and Spa in Cape Verde on Sal Island, where the airline captain promptly embarked on a very different kind of trip, that being an all-night binge-drinking session at the hotel bar. It was around 2:30 a.m. on August 5th late that night, or early the next morning depending on your point of view, that guests witnessed the now very intoxicated EasyJet captain stripping naked with his flaps fully extended, wandering through the hotel reception bar, spa, and gym completely naked, as in one guest describing the pilot in a quote, a paralytic state. Well, I wonder what that means. Anyway, unfortunately for the naked high-flying EasyJet captain, a guest who had flown with him aboard his flight from London Gatwick recognized him and quickly snitched to EasyJet about the free-balling, shock-calling, paralytic Captain Nudie Pants. The witness stated that the pilot did not have a stitch on and reeked of alcohol. Yes, reeked, I say. He said anyone who saw the pilot cavorting naked in the early hours on the day before the flight would not dream of getting on a plane with him at the controls. Well, then EasyJet found out. They said, well, this is not the way a proper Englishman acts, let alone an aviator flying the flag of the crown. No, sir. So EasyJet immediately suspended the captain from duty, with a spokesperson emphasizing that the airline takes the safety of passengers and crew as its highest priority. However, the captain's scheduled return flight was the long-haul return from Cape Verde to London Gatwick, one of EasyJet's longest flights at 2,332 nautical miles over 6 hours. However, even though the flight back was not for 36 hours, meaning in theory the captain was free to drink to his naked heart's content, nevertheless, the poor judgment shown by the captain called into question his fitness to fly. So that begs the question, was it a fair punishment? Especially considering that European regulations require a minimum of 12 hours between alcohol consumption and operating a flight. However, this incident occurred 36 hours before the flight, plenty of time to sober up. But what do you think? Let me know down below. But seriously, of course it was a fair punishment. Even if this pilot legally complied with the aviation alcohol consumption rules, getting rip-roaring drunk and prancing naked through guest areas at the resort represents a profound lapse in professionalism and trust. Additionally, EasyJet stated that the captain also breached the airline's code of business ethics, which requires staff to behave with integrity when dealing with our people, our customers, our partners, and the communities within which we operate. So regardless of whether he was technically sober by the time of the flight, the pilot's actions shattered credibility. No one wants to board a plane knowing the person at the controls was stumbling naked through the lobby hours earlier. And as the site Live and Let Fly put it, EasyJet did the right thing by pulling him from service. The bottle to throttle window isn't just about blood alcohol, it's about judgment, composure, and safeguarding passenger trust. Indeed. Well, speaking of flapping in the breeze, Paddle Your Own Canoe is reporting that a British Airways pilot flying from London to New York allegedly left the cockpit door open during takeoff so that his family members, who were passengers on the packed plane, could watch him be all piloty flying the plane. So far, no word on whether this pilot was naked at the time. However, sources told The Sun that the cockpit door remained open for a significant amount of time after takeoff, and that the passengers were all aware that the door had not been locked and shut as required. And as we all know, since 9/11, a locked cockpit door during the flight is the worldwide rule. The incident occurred on a British Airways flight BA-173, which departed London Heathrow at around 12 p.m. on August 6. The plane was a Boeing 777-300, which can carry up to 256 passengers. But apparently the cabin crew on the 7.5-hour flight were so disturbed by what happened that they immediately reported the incident to British Airways management. So once the plane landed in New York, British Airways suspended the pilot. But while he was still in New York, this meant that the return flight he was scheduled to fly, departing from JFK on August 7, had to be canceled. But according to The Sun, following the incident, the airline quickly determined that there had been no security threat and the pilot had already been returned to active duty. Well, that seems an alternative event. Anyway, in a statement, a spokesman for British Airways told The Sun, so you know it's got to be true, "Safety and security is our top priority." And then our final Pilots Gone Wild story for August, this also by way of paddle your own canoe. A Frontier Airlines pilot has been accused of calling in a fake bomb threat against one of his own company's planes in order to stop his ex-girlfriend from attending his domestic violence court hearing. Well, this guy sounds like a swell dude. Frontier Airlines pilot Andrew Brenneman, 25, who joined the airline as a first officer in 2023, started dating a Frontier flight attendant in November of 2024. However, just 5 months later, she broke off the relationship when she accused him of assaulting her. Oh, that explains the domestic violence hearing. In one incident, PYOK reports that Brenneman's ex-girlfriend says he threw her to the ground before putting his hands on her and scratching and bruising her. Brenneman is also accused of sending malicious text messages. Brenneman's ex-girlfriend reported the alleged assault to the police in Kentucky, where he was based, and on May 9, she was due to attend court in Curtin County to secure an emergency protective order against Brenneman. Okay, at this point, I just want to point out that these crazy people hold your lives in their hands when they fly your plane. Just thought I'd state the obvious. Anyway, according to the Cincinnati Enquirer, a day before this court hearing, Brenneman allegedly called in the fake bomb threat against the plane that his ex-girlfriend was actually flying on to attend the hearing. And if that wasn't bad enough, the bomb threat allegedly specifically named his ex-girlfriend flight attendant as planning an attack on the plane, resulting in the police having her removed before takeoff and questioning her. Dang, this pilot is a genuine psychopath. However, thankfully for the flight attendant, it was quickly established that she was innocent and she was allowed to get on another flight with a different airline to attend the hearing. But the damage had already been done by that point. The Cincinnati Enquirer spoke with the flight attendant, who says she told police she believed Brenneman fabricated the whole story, hoping the police would restrain her and keep her from attending the court hearing. But here comes the good news, because on July 4th, coincidentally, U.S. Independence Day, Brenneman was relieved of his own independence and was arrested at his home and arraigned on domestic violence and harassing communications charges. Brenneman was suspended by Frontier once the emergency protective order was granted, although it remains unclear whether he is still working for the airline. Well, that's not very reassuring. Anyway, as for his ex-lover girlfriend, she is over the whole Frontier experiment and she quit her job in July. Unless you think this is just a one-off incident, well, think again, because there is definitely a precedent for spurned lovers to make fake bomb threats against flights. In 2023, a veteran Argentinian flight attendant allegedly called in a bomb threat against a Miami-bound plane because her ex-boyfriend was on board with his new girlfriend. In that case, prosecutors allege that the flight attendant called in the bomb threat to stop her ex-boyfriend from flying to Miami to see his family. Her ex-lover was also a flight attendant for the state-run Argentinian flight carrier and was traveling with his new girlfriend, who was also a flight attendant at the same airline. Sheesh. And finally, if you missed the badge cam video I posted earlier this week about Southwest Airlines Captain David Paul Alsop, who promptly used that old excuse, "I had a few light beers last night," well, he was removed from the flight deck just in the nick of time as the plane full of passengers was about to take off. However, an alert TSA agent contacted airport police, and he was promptly arrested, jailed, and fired. I'll include a link to that crazy video in the description. So what can we conclude from all this craziness? Well, I know we like to think of pilots as some kind of supermen who say their prayers and take their vitamins and care about your safety. But just remember, the next time your pilot hits the throttles for takeoff, he could be a drunk naked guy who just called in a bomb scare who forgot to close the cockpit door. So as you let that wash over you, don't forget to share your thoughts and let me know down below. And as always, until next time, this is Maximus.